On a lonely planet slowly spinning its way to damnation, amid the incompetence and unpreparedness of lesser space programs, one team stands resilient against the herds, putting their lives on the line to aid those who are previously unaware of the quick save option. Yes, it's the incredible adventures of Jebediah and his crack team of Kerbinauts. They are the Blunderbirds, saving the Kerbin race one stranded explorer at a time.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Blunderbirds, a series that usually involves me sending a rescue landing craft to a stricken spacecraft on the surface of another planet or moon and moving the stranded Kerbals onto the rescue craft and returning them home. But just this time, I saw an opportunity for a mix-up of the formula. A member of my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description by the way, by the name of French Car Enthusiast, French car enthusiast attempted to fly an SSTO to the surface of the Mun, realised he couldn't, and so for some reason then attempted to land on Minmus instead, but ran out of fuel in the process. I have to admire the ambition, even though the Delta V numbers didn't really stack up from Mun landing, but I felt bad for the Kerbals stranded on the SSTO, which is currently drifting in a somewhat high and eccentric Kerbin orbit, and so I thought I'd send a refueling craft to dock with the stricken spaceplane, load it up with liquid fuel, and then have it complete the mission that French car enthusiast wanted oh so badly to do. Land it on the surface of the Mun and Minmus before returning the entire craft back to the Kerbal Space Center's runway. Yeah, I'd hate to disappoint the crew of Kerbals on board, who I'm sure were very excited about landing on the moon, who are all probably a little bit saddened by the fact they never managed to achieve this. Here we are in the vehicle assembly order, by the way, just wrapping things up for the build. I didn't really cover anything about the build specifically because, well, A, I was introducing the concept of this video, and also, as you can see, it's just a big, dumb booster, really. We've got an SLS-style first stage with that orange core with a mammoth engine, flanked by two big solid rocket boosters, and then just, I guess, a regular old rocket stage on top. Anyway, we're going to now think about launching. So, French car enthusiast save file was quite big. There were loads of craft everywhere. So here I am just sort of filtering the craft that's visible on the map screen, so we could only see space planes. Even then, there were quite a few. So I actually went and renamed the stranded spacecraft to Rescue Me, so I knew I was going to be docking to the correct vehicle in low Kerbin orbit. Or is that even a low Kerbin orbit? Guess it's probably medium to high, right? And there we are, soaring off the launch pad with, who do we have there? Edelemi Kerman, Dufane Kerman, and Gerbel Kerman. There we are. I didn't actually check who was on the crew. There was no Jebediah, Bill, Bob, or Valentina, unfortunately. I didn't want to ask what happened to them. Maybe they're somewhere safe on a space station in French car enthusiast save file. And there we are, punching through the clouds. Well, I say I didn't check, which Kerbals are on board. Oh, here we go. Love a little staging event just there. Yeah, I didn't check which specific Kerbals were on board in terms of what their names were, but I wanted to make sure that one of them was an engineer. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that the spaceplane that stranded in low Kerbin orbit, it was out of electricity, and there were no solar panels on board. Not the end of the world, because we'll be using the nuclear engines, which have an alternator on board, so the nuclear engines can continually recharge the batteries, but I don't know, not really the most elegant solution. So, on board this rescue craft, well, it's not really a rescue craft, is it? The spaceplane can rescue itself once we refuel it with the refueling craft. We also have a little cargo bay on board that contains some solar panels that the engineer Kerbal can attach using the EVA thing. What, does that even have a name? I always say, the EVA thing that engineers can do. There goes the launch escape system, by the way. Maybe I should look up what it's called. Oh, actually, I'm too lazy. Guys, just let me know in the comments what's it called, and I'll try and be better for future videos. Anyway, we could circularize and then try and plan a rendezvous, but you know me, I'm busy. We're just going to go ahead and do a docking straight away. So I'm doing a little maneuver node to try and get a nice close encounter. I was sort of aiming for 10 kilometers or closer. As you can see, it's a fairly big burn, nearly 800 meters per second. So I mentioned this a lot in videos that, when you do a large maneuver node burn, and when I say large, I mean more than I don't know, 300 meters per second. The actual orbit you end up with isn't really that, well, it's not really the same as what the Luminode thought it was going to be. So, not the end of the world. We're trying to get into, try and reach another planet's sphere of influence, because those things are big, by their nature, but when trying to rendezvous with small craft, it's not going to be that accurate. So just rough ballpark rendezvous at first, then we'll do some kind of mid-course correction burns to bring those encounter indicators a little bit closer. So we're going to go for the second close approach, which is those purple ones there. And yeah, that's that. So now we're just going to go ahead and time warp around and plot our mid-course correction burns. As you can see, our inclination around Kerbin is not quite right, so that was kind of the biggest thing to correct. Now I'm just playing around with retrograde, prograde, radial in, radial out, try and force that encounter to be a little bit closer. And we're now sub 1 kilometer, which is nice. I do believe I do another burn at some point to bring it a bit closer before our final kind of rendezvous point. Now, normally when you see me do rendezvous on this channel, because I'm lazy, I use something called the Lowne lazy method of docking, where both craft just automatically align themselves with each other, so no monopropellant is required. The ships just drift together, and it's dead easy. I don't think I invented the technique, but I think it became popularized because people saw it on my channel, and they were like, how did you do that? And I was like, oh, doesn't everyone do that? And so, well, that's the story about that. But because the stricken spaceplane has no electric charge, we can't do that because, the spaceplane can't change its orientation. And we can't recharge its batteries by firing the nuclear engines for a little bit because there is 0 fuel left on board. So we're going to try and rectify both of those things. We're going to add solar panels with the engineer, and we're obviously going to refuel the craft using the refueling spacecraft that we are currently flying towards the target. So here I'm just messing around with RCS by pressing I, J, K, L, H, and N on the keyboard to try and bring our encounter nodes that little bit closer. So what's our separation there? I'm moving the camera around too much to see, but I think it was fairly close. So we're going to just go ahead and point retrograde relative to our target to kill off all of our speed. There it is. We have visual on the spaceplane. We're sort of on the wrong side. So luckily, French car enthusiast, it's really hard to say that name, added an inline docking port to the spacecraft. And even though we don't have electricity, it can still open on its own. So we can just go ahead and try and maneuver the rescue craft to be kind of on the correct side of the docking port before we attempt our docking. Now, you could use a mod like a docking port alignment indicator, I think is what it's called. I've never used it, and I've never really had too many issues with docking in KSP, so... Well, I have in previous videos, but, things like this, it's fairly simple. You can just use the retrograde and prograde markers and the target indicators on the nav ball to kind of know if your docking port is aligned. So if the prograde marker is in line with the target indicator, as it sort of is now, then you're on a good course. So here we are, approaching the docking port now. Is it gonna rendezvous? Is it gonna catch? Yes, it is. There was no tension there, because obviously I'm recording this video, so the assumption is that everything was a success. So, now we're going to go ahead and pump the liquid fuel onto the SSTO. Now, it's not going to completely fill it with fuel, but it's going to give it more than enough Delta V to perform the mun and minless landings that I set out to do. I think one regret was not putting a little bit of oxidizer on the spaceplane as well. Although I don't have any dedicated oxidizer refueling tanks on the refueler, like all the oxidizer on board is to fire its own engine, it has more than enough Delta V to get back to Kerbin, so we could have just expended some of its oxidizer, or I guess donated some of its oxidizer to the stranded spaceplane, just so that when we're taking off from the mun, we have a bit more oomph to kind of kick off the surface. But it was all fine. There was a bit of drama when it came to taking off from the mun, but we'll cover that as we get there. So here we are on EVA with our engineer, adding some stuff to the spaceplane. So I added some static and retractable solar panels to ensure electrical supply was met. I also added a fuel drain valve as well. You see, I was a bit dubious of the aircraft design. The forward canards are very far forward, and because I'd never personally tested this aircraft, I wasn't sure how well it would glide on re-entry to the Kerbal Space Center, so I wanted to be able to have as much control over the location of the center of mass as possible. It can be moved by pumping fuel from forward to aft tanks and vice versa, and if necessary, dumping fuel with the newly added drain valve to reduce mass overall. Now, spoiler alert, it wasn't needed in the end, but it's something I'd rather have and not need than need and not have. So there we are, with the spaceplane refueled, it has 4,745 meters per second of Delta V, which is a huge amount, easily enough to perform both a mun landing and a minmus landing, and I would hope a landing back at Kerbin as well. Speaking of landing back at Kerbin, the Blunderbird Refueling Craft 3000, or whatever it was I called it, has completed its mission, so now we're just going to go ahead and re-enter Kerbin, and let Edelemi, I don't know, Adalemi. I think that's how you pronounce it with the little dash above the E. Adalemi Kerman, Dufane Kerman, and Goebel Kerman. I've spent a long time now talking about their names. Can go back to their families, I guess. I've forgotten what I was even talking about before I started spending so long trying to figure out how to pronounce the first Kerbal's name. But yeah, we have an absolutely beautiful re-entry there, courtesy of the Firefly re-entry mod. All the visual mods, by the way, are listed in the description. Should also mention we have a parts mod sort of being showcased today, which I can talk about when we cut back to the SSTO, although you guys probably already saw what it was. You know, I'll cover it regardless. And here we are splashing down. Beautiful stuff. I will recover the craft, which is something I don't think French Car Enthusiast does because the surface of cabin was littered with vehicles, but that's not a problem for me. Now we can rename Rescue Me to Blunderbird because it's not the same vehicle as it was, and I also forgot what it was called when I loaded the save. So I've called it the Blunderbird because I've sort of modified it. I added some solar panels and a drain valve, so I'm happy to call this a completely new vehicle, and we can call it the Blunderbird. So here we are plotting a course to go to the Mun. I guess it's been to the Mun before, like on a flyby. I don't really know what French Car Enthusiast's flight plan looked like prior to me rescuing his craft, but whatever, we're going to plot a path to the Mun. The crew on board are all probably rolling their eyes thinking, oh, we've already tried this, it didn't work, not knowing somehow that the craft has obviously been refueled so they can actually do the landing they were promised. And they'll have a brilliant panoramic view of the surface of the Mun from the seats on which they are sitting because, and I am now slowing down my speech cadence because I want the footage to cut to the point that I'm making here. I guess I'm just creating another maneuver node to optimize our encounter with the Mun. And there we are. We now can see the spacecraft, so I can continue with that little tangent. As you can see, they've got great panoramic views from their seats because they have that cockpit. It's a mod. In fact, not the cockpit, the crew passenger module. But yeah, it's from a mod. It's from the Mk2 Expansion Pack, I think is what it's called. I'll link in the description. It adds a bunch of Mark II spaceplane parts, and it's really cool actually. It is something I've always been meaning to try, and I just keep forgetting it exists, basically. So now I've got it installed, then this is a perfect opportunity to explore this mod maybe next week. I don't know. I can't remember what I've got planned for next week. I'm sure at some point in May I'd like to do an Outer Planets mod showcase because that's a long time coming, right? So I'll see kind of what my scheduling looks like and we'll go from there. But yeah, that little the crew module there is part of the Mark II Spaceplane Expansion Pack. I don't think any of the other parts on this spaceplane are modded, so that's that. But yeah, as you can see, we have now circularized around the Mun. We have deployed our landing gear. So now it's time to start thinking about our landing. Now, as you can see, this craft, kind of big, kind of bulky. We've only got 2 nuclear engines powering it, which means that the thrust weight ratio is not great. So landing is going to be a bit of a switching between retrograde and kind of radial out, kind of holding this diagonal position here, just so that our vertical speed doesn't get too high, whilst our horizontal speed is what's primarily being bled off. And here we are getting towards, we're now kind of about 100 meters per second in velocity. So now it's going to be a case of, well, I guess landing now. So we're ending up in this sort of crater here, which is kind of good. As you can see, we don't have any kind of means of vertical takeoff, so we're gonna have to need some sort of like ramp or runway to kick off the ground when it comes to lifting off. So thought the crater would be a good choice because obviously we could just use the natural ramp that is the crater to get, I was about to say airborne, I guess spaceborne. Anyway, came down a little bit hard, as you can see. Whoop. But nothing broke, and we don't have the cheat menu active, so something you'll find out later on when I do an even more ludicrous maneuver. I even opened it just to check, like, I hope French Car Enthusiast doesn't have, like, unbreakable joints enabled, because that seemed really sketchy. Speaking of really sketchy, as you can see, I have Parallax Continued installed, which means we have all of this ground scatter, and all of that ground scatter has collision. So if I were to design a Mun spaceplane that lands on the Mun and takes off, like, my own, like if I were to be the one that designed it, I would engineer some sort of either completely vertical takeoff system or a system that allows the spaceplane to kick up off the ground really quickly, like maybe like a belly-mounted engine just to provide some extra thrust to the front to really make sure it kicks off vertical, so there's minimal driving, like we have to do any kind of like conventional runway style takeoff, because of course, look at the ground, it's covered in stones, and I talk about this quite a bit where KSP has this thing called ping physics, where just touching the rock in the wrong way will cause the spacecraft to just ping out of control and your day is ruined. But before we focus on the takeoff, we'll do a quick little tour of French car enthusiasts spaceplanes. I'm using the mod FreeIVA here. Try to just duck through this bit here. So this is the inline docking port module. Then we can go to the crew module. This is obviously a modded part, but it's supported by FreeIVA. And there we are. We've got a little plane landing for dummies book just there. Don't need it though, of course. We are professionals. We can leave the book there. And yeah, make sure the crew are all okay, which they all seem to be. Kerbals love space, so guess it's a given that they're going to be happy being in space. Now we can get back onto our seat and start thinking about taking off. Now, like I said, this was easier said than done. Here is one of my attempts. So yeah, that was one of several attempts taking off with ground scatter kind of collisions enabled. And it just didn't work. This thing is just too slow and sluggish, and its thrust weight ratio is too bad. And the front RCS jets, or like engines, they're not strong enough to kick the nose up in any meaningful way. So eventually I had to just give up and disable the collision of the Parallax mod. But I promise I'll do like some sort of make good SSTO video at some point where I will go ahead and design a MUN SSTO that can take off with max collision enabled. Well, not max collision enabled, because that's like dumb. It's like even like the blades of grass have collision, which isn't really what would be like in real life. But yeah, just for this one time, I had to disable collision. But you know, if I'm using the excuse that I didn't design this craft, so it's perfectly fine. Oh, deja vu. I've just been in this place before. Higher on the street, and I know it's my time to go. Calling you, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet. It's so hard when I try to be me. Were. Yeah, I wanted to use the real song, but I'd get copyright struck, but I'll make a short or something. I posted that to Reddit with like the real song on it, so yeah, that was the takeoff there. And that was me opening the cheat menus just to make sure that I definitely that worked, did it? Like I didn't have like unbreakable joints or no crash damage enabled. I guess like watching it back and nothing actually hit anything. The rear end just came very, very close to clipping into the ground. But there we are. The ground is very far away from us now because we are no longer on it. Sometimes I start segues so confidently, guys, and then just immediately fall flat on my face. Maybe I can have another go when we do our Minmus takeoff, because of course we have now finished our kind of excursion on the MUN. We need to raise our periapsis somewhat so it's not too close to the surface before we start plotting our journey to Minmus. Now this is usually pretty easy. The way I would recommend you do this is just literally leave the MUN's sphere of influence, get into Kerbin's sphere of influence, and adjust your orbits so that you won't, encounter the MUN. From there, just then plot a journey to Minmus like you would if you're going from low Kerbin orbit. Sure, it's not quite as efficient as doing it this way, I think, maybe, but much, much easier. I decided, you know what, I'm lazy, I'm just going to plot a maneuver node from the MUN to get us directly to Minmus. And I ended up just not thinking it through. I just rushed. I should have time warped a bit so that the MUN and Minmus are in better locations relative to each other to get an encounter from the MUN to Minmus, but I was just being impatient. I think in my impatience, it's going to be way longer to plot the maneuver node than it really should have done, and the maneuver node wasn't even very optimal in the end. It ended up taking me an enormous amount of in-game time to reach Minmus, because it ended up being a couple of orbits required of... I thought, from this maneuver node here, that basically we would leave the MUN sphere of influence and then literally just encounter Minmus. But that wasn't the case. It actually took several orbits of Kerbin before that Minmus encounter appeared. So, yeah, it took a while. But, Kerbals love being in space, so I'm sure it was no issue for them as we approached 10 days, 11 days, in fact, of total mission time. Now, I mentioned efficiency and how I felt at the time this would be more efficient, but now I'm kind of in post-mission mode and I have a bit more clarity. I'm not rushing as much. I think it actually might be more efficient to just do an ejection burn from the MUN and get your periapsis around Kerbin relatively low, and then perform your burn to Minmus from Kerbin Periapsis, because you're maximizing use of the O-Birth effect, and I do think that would be kind of the most efficient way of getting to Minmus in this circumstance. I haven't crunched the numbers, but I think that makes sense, because, like, for example, if you're doing a Ghillie mission, when you want to get back to Kerbin, it actually makes sense to leave Ghillie's Sphere of Influence, then drop your Periapsis very, very close to Eve. Makes it much, much, much more efficient to get back to Kerbin by burning at low Eve Periapsis. But whatever, you know, it's all in the past. We could dilly and dally on what I should have done and what I shouldn't have done. Doesn't matter in the end. And, you know, at the end of the day, we have 2,137 meters per second of delta V remaining, which is enough that efficiency doesn't really matter in this case. You can see how glitchy that Minmus encounter is, and how Minmus is actually nowhere close to us when we passed over its orbit. Yeah, we had to make several passes before we finally got that encounter to appear. So that happens occasionally to me from time to time in Kerbal Space Program, where I think I'm going to get an encounter and actually it's in several orbits time. Kind of annoying when it happens, but, you know, whatever. It did extend our mission time by somewhat. Like, we're now at 102 in-game days. But again, Kerbals love space. They haven't got much space inside the SSTO, but they are in space. And, you know, they look happy. I think there's no Kerbal portraits at the bottom of the screen right now because we are in the map view. But I'm sure once we cut to the gameplay screen, they'll be smiling away because they are about to land on Minmus. They never thought they would achieve this on their flight to the moon, but there they are, smiling away. They're very, very happy. So I don't want any criticisms in the comments about, you know, how long this mission took or anything. Instead, write me a comment about your favorite type of lake. I like a good oxbow lake myself. You know, sometimes I see a river with a bit of a kink in it. I'm like, that's gonna become an oxbow lake one day. You just mark my words. But, you know, anyone else, if you have a different kind of lake you prefer, then let me know in the comment section below, and I will I will read the comments in the comment section below. Whatever, I guess I'm stalling for time here now because there's nothing really to talk about until we touch down on the surface of Minmus, which is happening very, very imminently. So landing on Minmus, of course, is a lot more trivial than landing on the Mun because it has much, much lower surface gravity. So the pitiful thrust-weight ratio of this vehicle is not as much of an issue. And of course, our thrust-weight ratio is a bit better overall because, of course, we have less fuel and therefore less weight and therefore more relative thrust. Just before landing, I decided to initiate a hover and do this little spin so that we nose down will be facing 90 degrees, which is actually incorrect. I've now made things much worse because now we're pointing 270 degrees, which is the exact opposite direction from where we want to be pointing. Basically, when you take off from a planet or moon in Kerbal Space Program, you want to be launching along the 90-degree vector because that's the direction in which the planet or moon rotates, and therefore you get a bit of extra delta V, and yeah, that's it. And obviously 270 degrees is the exact opposite. So don't know how I made that mistake because I feel like I've done SSTOs enough in this game at this point to know that I shouldn't do that. But whatever, it's not a big deal, I guess. Anyway, now we can get a Kerbal on EVA and plant our flag. There's a little pale blue dot in the distance there. We're so far away from home. And there we are. Look at that beautiful icy surface. So we obviously still have Parallax Continued installed. Luckily, no ground scatter on the Minmus flats, which makes taking off much, much easier. But the Minmus flats still look absolutely gorgeous. Those icy reflections, that little sheen. I love it. And then we can get our Kerbal back on board. He can find his seat. And then we can get ready to take off once again. So to start off with, I'm going to have to make sure our ship is pointing along the 90-degree vector rather than the 270-degree vector. I guess, like I said, I've got enough delta V where efficiency doesn't really matter at this point, but I feel like, you know, out of principle, I should follow best practices, especially when I'm making a video to showcase Kerbal Space Program. I realize people watch these videos to try and improve their own skills at the game, so figured I should, you know, at least put the effort in, you know. I also tried this little technique that I've never tried before, where I modified the dampener and spring strengths of the landing gear so that we're kind of ending up in this natural sort of nosing up point. I don't think it really worked in the end. The problem is those rear landing gears are just too far back, so they don't really act as a good fulcrum for the center of mass. So it just became a case of trying to build as much speed as possible. Now here we are, another little deja vu moment here. I didn't realize I'd somehow disabled SAS upon takeoff. So the craft was sliding out a little bit. I was just trying to control it, and I was attributing all of this to KSP's janky wheel physics. But as we started nosing up, the control didn't really get any better. I've now enabled RCS, but I somehow still haven't noticed that SAS is disabled. So you'll kind of see the craft start to spin a little bit upon ascent. It took me a little while to realize my mistake and then enable SAS. But yeah, we have now taken off from the minimum flats here. We're very slowly rotating. Is Pastmat going to notice? Trying to course correct, and now I'm overshooting. What is happening? Wow, it took me a really long time to figure this out, didn't I? I guess I'm now distracted by the maneuver node. Aha! We have now enabled SAS, so control has once again been resumed. So first of all, we're going to circularize around Minmus. As you can see, I massively overcooked our ascent, and our apoapsis was really, really high up. So I'm just going for aiming for a kind of a lower and more circular orbit. So I guess the current orbit we have is fine, but the periapsis is only about 4 kilometers, which isn't really all that high. Minmus has some pretty high peaks on it, so I usually aim for about 30 kilometers for orbiting Mun or Minmus, just so that we're kind of nice and high, and also we're avoiding any potential ground obstacles. And then we're going to go ahead and try and plot our course back to the Kerbal Space Center. I'm going to try to use the Pro way as well. So we're not going to use the Rapier engines. We're just going to deorbit with the nuclear engines and then just try and glide our way back to the KSC, which I found has been made somewhat more difficult as of late because of BlackRock's volumetric clouds. Like, brilliant mod, love it. It's a huge game changer. But sometimes it can obfuscate the location of the Kerbal Space Center's runway if it's a really cloudy day. You can't really see where you're going. And that was kind of the case this time. But luckily, French car enthusiasts, I think that's the name, they had so much debris around the Space Center that I could just sort of target a piece of debris and navigate my way back to the runway that way. So it was all fine in the end. I don't know why I'm spoiling all of this. This is all still to come. So I'm just sort of playing around with my orbit here. So I want to be coming in equatorial because, of course, the Kerbal Space Center sits along Kerbin's equator. And then I'm going to try and adjust our periapsis so that it's about... I still don't really know what the optimal periapsis would be for coming in from the height of Minmus. So you don't want to be too low because then obviously you'll like just burn up and be destroyed. But you don't want to be too high either because then you won't generate enough drag to lower the apoapsis enough and you'll have to do loads and loads of passes, which isn't really a big deal, to be honest, if you're just playing this game. But if you're making a video and you want the video to kind of flow and be entertaining, you don't really want to do that many aerobrake passes because then it will just drag on a bit. So I usually these days aim for about 40 kilometers, or in this case, I guess we're about 41 kilometers for our aerobrake altitude. And, well, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So here we are, beginning our air brake. So I have reactivated the control surfaces to give us a bit of, well, aerodynamic control. I have, of course, retracted our little communication antenna and our retractable solar panels as well. And, oh, we've flipped out a little bit, which made me very concerned. I was like, oh no, is the center of mass too far back and the center of lift too far forward? When you design an aircraft, you want the center of mass to be just in front of the center of lift. There is a saying, if the center of mass is only just in front of the center of lift, the plane will fly badly. If the center of mass is behind the center of lift, the plane will fly once. So I was like, oh no, I guess when this craft was built, it flew well. But that was when it was full of fuel. Now we've lost a lot of fuel. The center of mass has moved back, potentially behind the center of lift. Luckily, we got quite a lot of liquid fuel remaining. So here I am just pumping all of the liquid fuel into the forwardmost tanks to try and force our center of mass to be as far forward as possible and therefore make sure our craft's gliding ability, that's the correct nomenclature, isn't it, is as good as possible, basically. So I think I, as a precaution, activated the Rapier engines in air breathing mode, just in case I undershot or overshot the runway, but it was my intention to not use them if I could possibly get away with it. So I'm just sort of modulating the air brakes there. The air brakes in KSP are brilliant for slowing down. They generate a lot of drag because that's what they're designed to do, but they're also very weak when it comes to withstanding the heat of re-entry. So you have to sort of like pulse them by enabling and disabling the brakes action group. And yeah, what's our apoapsis height? It's about 100 kilometers, give or take, which is a pretty good altitude to circularize. And then once we circularize, we will then attempt a landing trajectory. So here I am now just doing a prograde burn at apoapsis to raise our periapsis above the Kármán line. I don't know what the equivalent to the Kármán line is in Kerbal Space Program, but, you know, the border of space. And now we have done that, I'm going to rename this as a science vessel, because look at all the aircraft on the surface. I don't want the map screen to be too cluttered. So I renamed this vessel to, well, I didn't rename it, but I changed it to be a science module so that we could disable everything else on the map screen. So we've got a nice clean view of Kerbin, so I could more easily see where the Kerbal Space Center's runway was and distinguishing it from all the other kind of aircraft scattered along the surface of Kerbin. Once we land, we can reassign this to be a aircraft again. I don't know. I felt like none of that made sense. It seemed like a weird thing to have to talk about. But yeah, now we're going to do a retrograde burn. And that's it, actually. That should hopefully be the final ever burn that this craft has to perform. Yeah, and until obviously it's refueled and reflown on another mission. So I'm just opening the action groups here just to allow me to toggle the Rapier engines if I need to. But like I said, hopefully we won't need to. So where is the Kerbal Space Center's runway? So it's kind of a bit ambiguous at this point. We're over an ocean, but which ocean are we on? Oh, there's that little desert peninsula just there. So we should be on a pretty good trajectory here. As you can see, this craft wasn't the easiest thing to fly because it has really, really small vertical stabilizers. It's just got those two really small flaps to keep this thing vertically stable. So it was kind of wanting to drift left and right. It's kind of a common theme with this video, isn't it? We've been doing lots of drifting on Mun, on Minmus, and whilst we re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. So maybe as a way in which French car enthusiasts could improve this aircraft design is maybe adding some slightly larger vertical stabilizers. But just chopping between the gameplay view and the map screen view, we're on a pretty good course for the Kerbal Space Center's runway, and there's those mountains that sit just ahead of the KSC. So once we're kind of at this height where I can see these mountains, I'm pretty happy. The Kerbal Space Center is a bit more to the left though, so we're going to start wanting to turn at some point, though I was a bit scared because in an unstable aircraft they can glide like this fine, but once you start doing control inputs, that's when they start to flip out of control. But as you can see, it looks like the act of me pumping the fuel into the forward tanks has helped the stability quite a bit because the craft is flying, well, really, really well. The only thing really it does want to it's moving. It's not very stable in flight, it's moving a lot. And that's because those rear control surfaces, the big S elevons, they're really I don't know, they're really twitchy. They're not really good for smaller aircraft. They're great for shuttles, but other than that, I don't really tend to use them. I find they're just too twitchy and they want to just continually move and try and fight the SAS, and it's hard to keep the flight stable. So yeah, that's the only real thing there. And that's it. That's you can see the landing gear are deployed. We're coming in at a nice slow speed. Well, a little bit too fast, but I knew that once I'd activated those air brakes, we would start decelerating significantly, which has now happened. Look at, you can see all the debris on the surface, can't you? It was very helpful tracking that as I was coming in, and there we are. We have touched down and we have deployed the parachutes, which means that this mission has come to an end. 119 days. I think the Kerbals have been in space for 2 days prior to me rescuing them. So yeah, they spent a little bit longer than I anticipated. I guess that was just that really long path to Minmus that caused that. But yeah, Kerbals love being in space, so I don't feel too guilty. And yeah, we'll leave this on the runway. I won't recover it because it seems that French car enthusiast seems to love having lots of stuff on Kerbin. So we'll just leave it there. We'll deploy the solar panel so it doesn't run out of electricity. And yeah, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. There are 2 other video suggestions on screen. Click them if you think they look interesting. And of course, leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. And if you want to support me further by joining my Patreon or my YouTube member scheme, like the people on the right did, then click the links in the description. Your support is always very much appreciated. But that's the end of the video. So thank you for watching and goodbye.